chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Education, and I'm joined by the sponsors and my good friends and colleagues, City Councilor Anissa Asabi George and City Councilor Matt O'Malley. I want to remind you that this is a public hearing and is being recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8 and RCN Channel 82. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. We will also take public testimony and would appreciate it if you would sign in the back and check off the box that you would like to testify if that is the case. Please state your name and affiliation and limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. Today's hearing, actually, I'm sorry, I did not see it was my good colleague to the left was blocking. We also have City Councilor Sal LaMartina and City Councilor Tim McCarthy, who are in the chamber. Today's hearing is on 0745, order for hearing regarding later high school start times in Boston Public Schools. This matter was sponsored by Boston City Councilors Anissa Asabi George and Matt O'Malley and referred to the committee on May 18th, 2016. We will have a panel, but I will give the sponsors an opportunity to give opening statements, and then we will get to the panel. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Chair, and a special thanks to Councilor O'Malley for joining me in this effort. I'd like to thank all of the panelists that will be with us today, our specialists, our BPS administration, and then the students that will also be joining us. My hearing goals for today are twofold. One is to have a special and shared understanding of the needs of our teenagers, especially their sleep needs and how it affects and impacts their learning. I also want to have a better understanding of the shift of high school start times, what that would do to school operations and our ability to get kids to and from school, to and from after school activities, whether it's sports or clubs or work, and want to pay particular attention to those schools that start before 7:30 a.m. We have more than half of our schools that start before 7:30 in the morning are high schools, and it's really important that we have a conversation, especially about those students and what an additional 20, 30, 40 minutes could do for their day. As most of you know, I was a high school teacher prior to being elected to the Boston City Council, and one of the most impactful things for, I think, our students and the students that I taught was a good night's rest and how it really influenced their education and making sure that they're prepared and awake and ready to learn. And I look forward to today's hearing, to the information that's shared, to I'm sure the thoughtful questions from my colleagues. And I look forward to a soon and quick working session where we can really sort of take what we learned today and apply it in a meaningful way to what we do as a school district and as a city. So thank you, Chairman, and I look forward to hearing from everyone today.
Thank you, Councilor Asabi George. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm so delighted to partner with my dear friend and colleague and the lead sponsor on this initiative, Councilor Anissa Asabi George. It's a very important measure as we look at examining moving later start times for many of the city's high schools. As Councilor Asabi George noted, many Boston's high schools begin the school day between 7:20 and 9:30 a.m. About half of them start before 7:30 a.m. and many others, most others, begin before 8:30 a.m. Now, our high schools are citywide, and this means that students can choose to go to a school close to their home or travel across the city. BPS students in grades 7 through 12 rely on public transportation to get to school. So theoretically, you could have a student in Councilor LaMartina's district in East Boston and his neighborhood have to travel, a very long distance to the other side of the city. But even closer to home, it can still be an issue. My nephew began the 7th grade at the John D. O'Brien earlier this month or last month. He lives in West Roxbury. The John D. O'Brien School is in Roxbury. We're talking about not 2 neighborhoods over, yet he still has to leave his home by 6 a.m. because there's no direct route there. He has to either take a bus and then the Orange Line or take the commuter rail and then walk. For many students, including my nephew and many others, this means waking up well before dawn and traveling by MBTA bus and train, sometimes in the dark, to get to class by the first bell. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that teenagers get about 9 hours of sleep per night. The student is up at 5:30 to leave his or her house at 6 o'clock. that means they need to go to bed at 8:30 p.m. Can anyone in this chamber think of a teenager that is able or willing to go to bed at 8:30 p.m.? I don't think so. We're going to hear today from some experts, and they will talk about how the unwillingness for a teen to call it a day earlier may be more a part of their biology than their temperament. Lack of sleep can cause low grades, anxiety, depression, obesity, as well as some other severe health issues. Now, we all know there's a lot to consider with this proposal: transportation patterns, the effect on individual schools, after-school activities, and youth employment. But I think this is a very important first step, and I echo the calls of my colleague and friend, Councilor Sabi George, of expediting a working session after this, and I really think this is something that we ought to be exploring for the next school year, beginning next year. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to give a brief opening statement, Mr. Chair, and look forward to a very worthwhile hearing.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor LaMartina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I want to first thank Councilor Anissa Sabi George and Councilor Matt O'Malley for bringing up this issue. Councilor O'Malley said it earlier. When my daughter went to Boston Line, we would have to make sure that she was at Maverick Station by 6 o'clock in the morning to get to school on time. And I never understood it, why high school started so early, because she's up. They were up late doing homework, and so I'm just here to listen. I do have some concerns on the impacts we'll have for sport and some of the clubs after school, but I think it's a good idea, and I just hope that we could do this soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor LaMartina. Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the panels to come. I have two teenage boys myself. One's in college and one is a junior in high school. And going to bed was always a battle, and getting up is always a battle. And that's just me. So that's a whole other issue. Health is obviously very, very important, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. A lot of this comes down to parental guidance. Not having electronics in your phone in your rooms, TVs in your rooms. I think my wife Maureen and I were probably the bad guys growing up. My boys were not allowed to have any electronics in their room, their laptops, their computers, their smartphones. PS4 is down the basement, all of that stuff. It's very important, and I'm glad we're going to talk about that in this. As Councilor LaMartina so eloquently stated, as a dad and as a city, we push kids to do extracurricular activities. We know how important that is, whether it's sports or music, art, science, generally after school programming. So I know this is going to be not as easy as it sounds to move a school day back. But I'm very interested in the discussion, certainly because I have boys, but certainly because it could be very a positive impact on the kids in the city of Boston. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilor Presley, do you have opening remarks? Yes, right on time.
For the order, I'm sure I'll have more questions, but certainly we know that healthy students are better learners. And due to extracurricular activities and so many demands on working families, very often our young people are coming to school sleep deprived. And so I certainly could see the benefits to this in terms of supporting the health and wellness of our youth in order to be receptive to what is being taught to them. And I look forward to learning more about sort of procedurally what it would require for us to make this happen and to sort of shift things culturally.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flaherty.
And curious to see how it would relate to really the after school and the extracurriculars, particularly sports. If Boston were to do this, that's not to say that other schools and other school districts would follow suit. So, because sporting events happen right after school, so if we're playing, say, a Lexington or a Wellesley or any other town, they're not going to conform to our schedule. So then would they stop inviting us to participate in those games? And how would that work from an academic standpoint? So I subscribe, and I went to BC High. It was early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. But I understand that there's different trends happening, in our city, but also across the country. But at the end of the day, it has implications, and it looks that the extracurricular activities and the sporting, the school sporting events would probably take a back seat, I think, to to school hour changes. So I would just like to get a sense from folks in this room as to what that would mean. If we would change the school hours, what would that mean for those baseball games, those football games, those basketball games, those hockey games, et cetera? And would we still be able to compete and field teams at that level, or would we have to forego after-school sports? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flaherty. I too want to applaud the sponsors of this. I think it is high time that we actually consider the American Academy of Pediatrics indication to move forward with changing school start times for middle school and high school students to 8:30 or past that. Interesting, in Boston, we have citywide schools. That's not something that every city or town actually has. And so getting across, although we are not that large of a city actually in landmass, it takes a little while to get across the city. And so I think this also could be a transportation easing method to not have students traveling necessarily at the same peak hours as transportation. In addition, we live in a city that weather is an issue. And I think also having additional time in that space. I've spoken to many students whose schedules rival mine as a city councilor in terms of the extracurricular activities that they have that oftentimes bring them through later hours in the night. So I think it's absolutely critical that we think about that. I actually got a call today from Biddeford, Maine. Based on this, they actually they changed their start time to 8:30 and have actually seen some really promising things happen. Attendance as well as tardiness has actually gone down. There are definitely several tweaks around the transportation that have to be looked at. And they also reminded me that the slogan of Maine is the way life should be. And so that was one of the things that they actually said in the call. So really looking forward to hearing the expert testimony. And again, very encouraged by Councilor Asabi George, who has so much knowledge in this space, and also Councilor O'Malley, who's been a huge proponent of public education. And so we're going to have our first panel. We have Dr. Judith Owens, Dr. Charles Seisler, okay. Mary Haymaker? Hamaker, okay. And I'm going to have you introduce yourselves and give your background, but really look forward to your testimony. And everyone is very, very polite doctors. Okay. So so whoever would like to go first.
Yeah, I think your mics are all on.
Okay.
So my name is Dr. Judy Owens. I am the director of sleep medicine at Boston Children's Hospital, and I'm also the lead author of the American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement on school start times. So this is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart, and I see the repercussions every day clinically of teens who don't get enough sleep and have a whole host of health problems, academic challenges, safety issues, risk-taking behavior as a consequence of this. And so I'm very passionate and extremely happy that Boston Public Schools is contemplating making this change in the best interests of the health of their students.
Thank you very much.
And I'm Dr. Charles Seisler, and I'm the director of the Sleep Health Institute at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and also the Baldino Professor of Sleep Medicine and director of the Division of Sleep Medicine at the Harvard Medical School. And like Dr. Owens, I'm very passionate about this issue. I think it's great that the Boston City Council is contemplating making a change for the better in this direction, and I think that it does have to take into account all of the after-school activities. Of course, this has been managed in other school districts in Minneapolis since the mid-1990s successfully. And I know from personal experience, my son, who was a captain of 3 different sports before he graduated a couple of years ago in Dover-Sherburne, was also passionately trying to move this issue forward because it is. And somebody has to take a leadership position. And I think many school districts, Newton, other places, are already contemplating changes in this direction. I think if Boston were to move in this direction, it would help to set a statewide norm that would actually facilitate changing the timing of the sporting activities because of the huge impact that Boston has on so many different schools.
My name is Mary Hamaker. I'm the chair of the Massachusetts chapter of Start School Later, a 501c3 charity that advocates for healthy school start time for adolescents. I formed the Massachusetts chapter in March 2014 as my daughter was a junior at Algonquin Regional High School in Northborough, Massachusetts, and suffering from depression and anxiety, and watching her not get enough sleep and her symptoms get worse and worse. And I saw her academic performance go down. For a child who had been tested 6 ways from Sunday for all kinds of things, including intelligence, and tested as gifted, to see her get the grade she was getting because she was so ill and sleep deprived was, to say the least, disheartening as a parent. I have been advocating for this in Massachusetts and have been fortunate to meet with Dr. Owens and Dr. Seisler. We now have 14 town-based chapters of Start School Later, including the Boston chapter. You'll hear from the head of the Boston chapter hopefully later today. But there are now 79 chapters nationwide of Start School Later across the country. So this is an issue whose time has come. There are legitimate logistics to talk about. There are no insurmountable mountains. We can do this.
Thank you so much. Before we move forward, I just wanted the panel to just simply address, I heard you speak about safety issues, risk-taking issues, but also from the physicians from a physical, mental health, and safety and well-being aspect. Can you, one, give us insight on what the actual report says from the American Academy of Pediatrics? Oh, okay. Well, that's even better.
So, I mean,
So-
perhaps you'd like to start with your presentation.
Yes.
So Dr. Seisler is going
Thank you.
to present first.
So first of all, I want to put this a little bit in perspective. We think of this as Ms. Hamaker said, as an issue whose time has come. But actually, we have known about this for a century here in the United States. And Professor Louis Terman, who was chairman of the education department at Stanford for more than 20 years and who developed IQ testing in the United States, he recognized he did studies of sleep times in children and in the United States and compared them with other places in the world, and found that kids here were sleeping 1 to 2 hours more per night than they were in Europe. And that led him to conclude a century ago, in 1913, the European custom of beginning school at 7 to 8 o'clock in the morning works great hardship, and the American practice of beginning at 9 a.m. Is far wiser and should never be changed. Now, what has happened over the ensuing century is that without actually looking at the data or making a decision, we have slowly, 10 minutes at a time, incrementally moved our school start times earlier, even as the Europeans actually have adopted what used to be our schedule and moved their start times later. And in Europe, one of the headmasters in Britain said that moving the start times later had a bigger impact than any educational initiative that he had been involved with in the previous 30 years in terms of performance on A-level testing and so on. So we have sort of fallen behind in that matter, and something that we were ahead of a century ago. But in order to understand why this is important, we have to sort of step back and talk about what is the function of sleep. And so sleep has a variety of different functions, one of which is to clear metabolic debris from the brain that accumulates as we're awake. So the brain uses more energy than any other organ in the body. It's only about 2% of the body by weight, but it uses about 20 to 25% of all the glucose and all the oxygen that we consume each day. So it is a a fuel burning area, and that's because of the firing of these neurons that uses a tremendous amount of energy. One of the problems, and one of the things that happens during sleep is that we replenish that energy. And if we don't, then those areas of the brain become very sluggish and don't work very well. Another thing that happens during sleep is that we clear away the metabolic debris, because anytime you have a furnace burning, you get sludge and things that build up. And that, in a certain way, happens in the brain. And one of the things that builds up is a protein called amyloid beta. And if we allow that to build up to high levels, that forms plaques, and that is the basis of Alzheimer's disease. And that's one of the reasons why people with sleep disorders, such as sleep apnea, when they can't breathe and sleep at the same time, get cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease a decade earlier than age-matched controls. So the other thing that happens during sleep, besides clearing away this metabolic debris, is that we actually consolidate memory and learning during sleep. So during the first part of sleep, in deep slow wave sleep, that's when we sort of put into file cabinets all the things we have learned that day. That's when we consolidate short-term memory into long-term memory. Then in the second part of the night, particularly in the last 2 hours of the night, when we're in rapid eye movement sleep and the sleep stage associated with vivid dreaming, that's when we integrate the new things that we learned that previous night with all the previous information that we had known. So that's where inference, creativity, problem solving takes place during that rapid eye movement sleep. And if we cut off the last couple of hours of sleep by shortchanging ourselves and not realizing that sleep is not a unitary phenomenon, it's actually composed of these different elements, then we actually cut off our ability to integrate those memories with what we previously had known. And we cut off our ability to gain insight from what we had learned during the daytime on the previous day. And so that's why having school children get enough sleep is so critically important, because after all, they're there to learn, and by having them chronically sleep deprived, we're impairing their ability to do so. It's also been recognized that sleep is important for the body. So as was alluded to, I believe by Counselor O'Malley, if children don't get enough sleep, they actually gain weight because it changes metabolism. So we become insulin resistant. The kids are at greater risk of diabetes. And they also can't metabolize as efficiently the energy that they do take in. It also increases blood pressure and cardiovascular risk and degrades the immune system. So if you're getting an inadequate amount of sleep, if you're getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and only getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, then you only have half the antibody response to a flu shot you get it this fall than you do if you're getting a sufficient amount of sleep. Also, one thing that always gets the athlete's attention is when I point out to them that if you get 4 hours of sleep a night for a week, your testosterone levels drop by an amount that's equivalent to 11 years of aging. So it also impairs the ability, our ability to produce growth hormone, testosterone, and other critical hormones that are critical for the transition from being adolescents to being adults. And finally, sleep is critical for our ability to maintain focus and attention. And when we don't get enough sleep, adolescents are particularly at increased risk for being misdiagnosed with ADHD, because the symptoms of sleep deficiency mimic those of ADHD because of difficulty focusing attention, increased lability of emotions, so that people are more volatile, and they're much more likely to be sent down to the school nurse, and that leads eventually to a prescription for some type of amphetamines, which are used in the treatment. That's what Adderall and Ritalin and so on. They're all derivatives of amphetamines that we give our kids instead of giving them an adequate amount of time to sleep. And as was mentioned by Counselor O'Malley, these adolescents need at least 9 hours of sleep, 9 to 10 hours of sleep per night. And if you just do the arithmetic, you can't get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and be able to go to sleep at an adequate time. So then the question is, first of all, how do you achieve good sleep health in the adolescents in the Boston City high schools? the first critical thing is to have a minimum of 11-hour interval between the last scheduled activity and the start of school. So if you're going to have the kids starting at 7 in the morning, then you really should not allow any scheduled school-sponsored activities to go after 8 p.m. at night. And that would result in a huge hit on plays, evening gatherings, assemblies, or whatever else might be happening, other school-sanctioned activities, basketball games, etc. So I think it's very important to establish a consistent and sacrosanct interval where the kids can consistently sleep, because the ability to sleep is dependent not only on having an adequate amount of time to do so, but the other thing that regulates the ability to sleep, so one is sleep pressure, how much of sleep have you gotten? The second is this internal biological clock in the brain that controls the timing of our ability to sleep. And paradoxically, this internal clock sends out the strongest drive for waking just before what would be dusk in the outside world, or would be the time that we ordinarily go to bed. Now, why is that? Of course, we don't exactly know why these things are set up this way, but the speculation is that and this is true of almost all day active species, that they get this tremendous surge of energy and activity just before dusk in their local time zone, presumably so that they can get their nest or their safe place or whatever, get their act together before the sun goes down, when they can't see anything, and they can't, therefore, if you've ever gone camping, if you don't have your tent set up before it gets dark, it's very hard to get that ready and to choose a campsite and so on. So you don't want to be taking a nap and wake up and it's dark. So the whole internal clock is set up to send out a strong drive for wakefulness just before our usual bedtime. Consequence of that is that it's very hard for these kids to go to bed earlier than their usual bedtime. And one of the things that happens with adolescents, and this is very well documented, is that with the onset of puberty, their internal clock moves to a later hour than it was when they were 8 or 10 years old. And that movement of the internal clock to a later hour means that this wake maintenance zone, this surge of energy, is now happening much later in the evening, making it very difficult for these kids to go to bed. So when Councilor O'Malley, and I'm not just picking on you, but when you stated who's going to go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening as would be required, they simply can't, because they can't fall asleep at that time, even if they were motivated to try to go to bed at that time in order to get an adequate amount of sleep. So the internal clock is sending out this tremendous surge of energy and activity that is actually precluding their ability to go to bed at that time. The younger kids, 6, 7, 8 years old, they can go to bed at that time, but after puberty, they can't. And so we have the system flipped. Many times the younger kids are being sent to school later. They have a later school start time, and the older kids have an earlier school start time, and it really should be quite the reverse. And when we don't give the kids an adequate amount of time for sleep, then that is going to increase not only their tardiness and their absences, but increase their risk of motor vehicle crashes. We know that 1 out of 5 motor vehicle crash injuries and deaths are related to sleep deficiency. That's going to degrade academic performance, impair their ability to learn, increase the risk of depression and suicidal ideation, increase their risk-taking behavior, increase the risk of obesity and diabetes, and increase insulin resistance, as well as decreasing those hormones like growth hormone and testosterone. So for all these reasons, I think it's important to make a change, and Dr. Owens is going to talk about.
Awesome. Dr. Owens, can you bring us through this part 1 of your presentation, which we have in front of us?
I can certainly do that. I think that Dr. Seisler has covered a lot of that. And so if you don't mind, I would like to focus. That was part 1. So I'd like to focus on part 2 and 3. And part 2 is a little bit more embellishment about some of the consequences of insufficient sleep. And then finally, I'd like to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the data that suggests very strongly that healthy school start times mitigates some of the impact, the negative impact of insufficient sleep. So some of this is Dr. Seisler has covered in over an overview. I would point out that the first and third leading cause of death in adolescents between the ages of 15 and 19 are unintentional injuries, which include drowsy driving crashes. And the third most common cause of death is suicide. So the fact that insufficient sleep impacts both of those huge causes of mortality in this adolescent population really has made this become a public health issue. It's an academic issue, it's an educational issue, but first and foremost, it's a public health issue. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the relationship between sleep and regulation of mood and behavior. So, for example, we know that when individuals are sleep deprived in experimental settings and they have pictures taken of their brains under those conditions, that one of the areas of the brain that's most impacted is called the prefrontal cortex, which governs what we call executive functions. And these are things like decision making, problem solving, planning, the ability to observe one's behavior and anticipate consequences, modulation of emotions. And not only that, but this is a part of the brain that is undergoing tremendous changes, particularly during adolescence. So we're hitting these kids with a specific toxin right at the time when this part of the brain is most rapidly developing. And similarly, when we talk about emotional regulation, we know that sleep deprivation impacts what's called the amygdala or the emotional brain selectively. And that means that there is a heightened emotional response, particularly to negative stimuli, but also with less control over that response. And when you think about emotional regulation in teenagers, a lot of what we attribute to hormones may actually be due, in terms of their emotional reactivity, may actually be due to chronic sleep loss. And a third area of the brain that is selectively impacted by insufficient sleep is called the striatum, and that's a part of the brain that helps to regulate impulse control. So individuals who are sleep deprived take more risks because they perceive less in the way of negative consequences for that risk-taking behavior. And of course, that plays out in a myriad of concerns, things like substance use, things like unhealthy sexual or early sexual behavior, making poor decisions, using alcohol, and particularly driving under the influence of alcohol. So there's a whole host of adolescent risk-taking behaviors that we know are impacted by insufficient sleep. And this is a slide from the Centers for Disease Control, a study which looked at comparison of students who get less than 8 hours, high school students versus 8 or more hours. And all of these risk behaviors, like being more likely to be involved in physical fights, smoking marijuana, being sexually active, feeling sad or hopeless, are significantly more common in students who get that less amount of sleep. Dr. Seisler alluded to this issue of increased obesity risk and metabolic dysfunction being linked to insufficient sleep in children and adolescents as well, which probably reflects some hormonal changes, but also can be impacted by behavioral changes linked to insufficient sleep. For example, students who don't get enough sleep are less likely to eat breakfast, and we know that not eating breakfast is a risk factor for obesity. Students who don't get enough sleep are maybe too tired to exercise, and that also plays into this whole very legitimate concern about athletics and athletic performance. And I would make the argument that athletic performance and the risk of injuries may be impacted upon by sleep, not getting enough sleep. So that needs to be taken into consideration. And this next slide touches on that. We know that a substantial percentage of high school students who are driving admit to driving while drowsy. And we know that impairments associated with drowsy driving can be equivalent to the consumption or 3 to 4 beers, i.e. being moderately intoxicated. So a parent who would never allow their teenager to knowingly get behind the wheel, having consumed 3 or 4 beers, allows that to happen every day when kids are driving themselves to and from school. We also know that sleep loss is associated with an increased risk of pedestrian injuries, for example, in children. We know from at least one study that sleep loss is associated with increased sports-related injuries in high school athletes, and is also associated with an almost 3-fold risk in adolescents having work-related injuries that require medical care. So it goes beyond the impact of just what's happening in the school. It impacts their athletic performance, their likelihood of getting injuries, both on the playing field and during their after-school jobs. So are there any comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll move on to the third section.
Okay, go right to, you can go to the third.
Okay. I'm just gonna...
Can I just make a comment?
Go right ahead.
One of the things that I appreciate while you're switching over to the part 3 is, the athletic piece is incredibly important and the after-school enrichment is incredibly important. But in Boston, we also have a large number of our students that are working after school, not just because it's a part-time activity, but because they are also supporting their family income. So it's important that you also mention that work-related piece as well.
I got that. I got you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So this, I'll try to be brief. Here I'm going to present the evidence supporting healthy school start times as a means of improving health, safety, and performance in both middle and high school students. And it's been alluded to several times already. The American Academy of Pediatrics in 2014 came down in favor of this, and I will tell you personally, this was a 4-year process. This was a very well-vetted decision on the part of the AAP, and I'm truly delighted because I think it has made a big impact on school districts' willingness to think about this. So as was mentioned earlier, this concept of changing school start times, delaying start times, dates back to the mid-1990s when Edina, Minnesota, and then Minneapolis changed their high school start times. We don't have exact figures on how many school districts across the country have done this, but we think it's at least 1,000 high schools in more than 100 districts in 43 states have changed their high school start time, and almost none, with a very rare exception, have gone back to the original bell times. And I think that that's a very important statement. But overall, we know that less than 20% of middle and high schools in the U.S. overall start at that recommended 8:30 and later. And you've heard the figures about Boston. In Massachusetts, the average school start time is 7:53, and only 11% of public middle and high schools start at 8:30 or later. Interestingly enough, and I think this is an important point as well, that students in earlier starting schools are more likely to be in an ethnic minority, to be eligible for free lunch, and to have less educated parents. So this issue of early school start times may very well disproportionately affect the poorest children and children from racial and ethnic minorities, which I think is very, very important to keep in mind. And this just shows that Massachusetts does not look terribly good overall in comparison with the rest of the country. But be that as may, we're here to change that. So what are some of the outcomes that have been shown to occur when you delay school start times? Bedtimes remain the same, or in some studies, including one of our own, may actually shift somewhat earlier. So this misconception that, oh, kids will just stay up another hour if school starts later has not been borne out in any of the published studies. So as a result, students get more sleep, particularly that morning critical sleep where they're getting REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. The later the start time, the greater the sleep amounts. But in 2 of studies that we've done, even a 30-minute delay can result in improvements, particularly if the school start time change goes to 8:30 or later. And that's a really critical piece here. And as a result of getting more sleep, the students report less daytime sleepiness, falling asleep in class, doing homework, etc. School performance, attendance improves. Tardiness rates drops. Even dropout rates decline in the Minneapolis school system, for example. Standardized test scores improve, and grades improve. And it may be, again, that disadvantaged students may benefit relatively more, that there may be a larger effect of delaying school start times at the lower end of grade distribution, so students who are doing poorly to begin with, but also may affect racial and ethnic minorities preferentially as well. Health and safety, school start times that are delayed are associated with improved mood, less depressive symptoms, less suicidal thoughts, associated with decreased visits to the school health center, for example, so potentially lower healthcare costs, and safety. One of the most impressive things in my mind is that changes in school start times can lead to as much as a 65 to 70% reduction, or be associated with, I should say, in car crashes in the adolescent population. It's hard for me, I'm a public health person, to imagine a public health measure which could have that big a bang for the buck. And speaking of bucks, the Brookings Institute a number of years ago published a summary of the 3 most impactful changes that public schools could make to improve earning potential among students. And one of those 3 was delaying high school start times. That the cost of changing start times, which is usually largely related to transportation costs, is offset by an improvement in standardized test scores and an increase in earning potential eventually. And again, this has huge repercussions for students who are particularly economically disadvantaged. There are challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk more about: costs, the issue of athletic practices, after-school employment, providing childcare for younger siblings, adjustments in parents' work schedules. But overall, as I'm sure you'll hear from all of us, is that these adjustments are successfully made by communities. And many times the anticipation of problems far outweighs what actually transpires in terms of all of these challenges. And I would make this bold statement that to do nothing is to do harm. And I would ask you to consider that as you make your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilor Asabi George?
Want to wait for Mary and then we can
I'm
ask
sorry
the
about
panel? Is that okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
So the doctors have mentioned national health organizations that are supporting later school start time. I wanted to just add that the Massachusetts Medical Society joins that chorus of voices. Last year at their annual meeting, they adopted a resolution supporting the American Academy of Pediatrics statement on school start time. But it's not just the Massachusetts medical community that's in support of this. Our own Massachusetts Association of School Committees, also in 2015 at their November meeting, adopted a resolution acknowledging the scientific merits of moving school start time later for adolescents and supporting Senator Cynthia Cream's legislation calling for a study of the issues and the possible solutions. Towns across the state have begun to act. There are 14 town-based chapters of Start School Later, each one proceeding at the pace that is right for their school district. In addition, Start School Later Massachusetts is aware of 18 other Massachusetts towns and cities that are implementing or looking at implementing healthy school start times for their adolescents. Notably, and for those of you particularly interested in athletics, the Middlesex Athletic League superintendents got together and issued a pledge earlier this spring that they would each change the start of their high school start time to between 8 and 8:30 a.m. by the fall of 2018, effectively taking athletics off the table as one of the so-called logistics or reasons why this cannot be done. The Sharon High School principal, who Sharon implemented later school start time in 2010, has been a wonderful speaker and advocate across the state, sharing generously their experience with later school start times. And when asked about athletics, he I think he's a little impressed maybe with his own power, but he said, "We just told other schools when our kids would be available. They adjusted to us. We did not adjust to them." I'm also working with the Northborough-Southborough School District that is looking at this change. That factor alone took athletics off the table for Northborough-Southborough. They're now looking only at transportation as the last remaining issue to resolve. So I think that while athletics is incredibly important, that students learn amazing things in athletics, I think that it is resolvable. It is not insurmountable. And it sort of makes me smile to be on this panel with Dr. Seisler, who I think's nickname is Dr. Sleep, given to him by the Boston Celtics, because he worked with the Boston Celtics management to adjust their practice schedules to help improve the athletics, each athlete's performance. This is something that is being now taken up by not only other professional athletes, but it's now working its way into college athletics. Last fall, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about some of the more prominent football teams who bring their students, their college football players in early for practice before the season starts, and they set up dormitories, and they basically, the coaches sleep with the kids, and they make sure the cell phones are off and the lights are off, because they are now fully cognizant of this indisputable body of research that sleep and athletics go hand in hand. And so this is something that, the high school athletics, could certainly take notice of. The list of towns in Massachusetts that have already made the change is pretty substantial. It's Arlington, Ashland, which is changing in fall 2017, Canton, Duxbury, Easton, Hanover, Hingham, Holyoke, Marblehead, Marlborough Charter School, Medway, Monomoy Regional changing in fall 2017, Needham, Nauset, North Andover, and Sharon. Some of these schools have been operating at a later start time since as early as 2005, and their results are consistent with the outcomes that Dr. Owens mentioned. Things like a dramatic drop in D and F letter grades, improvements in tardiness rates and absences. But others have alluded to the needs of urban school districts who make these changes. Well, the good news is you don't have to start with a white piece of paper. There are schools who've done this who look maybe not exactly like Boston, but who have a lot of similarities to Boston. For example, Fairfax County, Virginia is the 10th largest district in the United States, serving 186,000 students. More than 28% of their students are eligible for free or reduced price meals, and more than 17% receive English as a second language service. Demographically, 40% of the students are white, 24% are Hispanic, 19% are Asian American, 10% African American, and 5% multiracial. The district's fleet of 1,600 buses transports 130,000 students daily. In 2015, Fairfax County changed its start time from 7:20 a.m. to between 8 and 8:15 a.m. The data from this change is being analyzed and hopefully available soon. Before adopting this change, officials gathered a lot of data about the families in their district, including surveys that they sponsored in both English and Spanish, to determine the factors that would present the greatest challenges to their families in their school district. Prior to receiving their survey data, the committee assumed that starting high school later would disrupt childcare arrangements for economically marginalized families where older teens cared for younger siblings after school. The survey data for them did not support this assumption. Instead, they received anecdotes about students who work the evening shift with their parents and who do not get home to start homework until after 11 o'clock at night. Those students enthusiastically welcomed a later morning start time so that they could get additional sleep and be better able to learn. One of the key lessons from Fairfax County is that school districts should gather data about the needs and concerns of the families in their own districts before deciding which issues are or are not a priority. Another critical message from Fairfax County and every successful change is that there are certain characteristics. One, leadership from within the school system. If your superintendent isn't on board, this is going nowhere. Two, education of all the stakeholders from the wider school community about why you are messing with the personal logistics of their family. They have to understand why. Otherwise, there will be a lot of disgruntled families, and this effort would go nowhere. Authentic engagement within the community to address and hear the concerns and fears, whether warranted or not. Letting people vent matters. Sufficient time before the change for the community to make the necessary adjustments to family, work, extracurricular, and childcare schedules is the fourth factor that is essential in making this change successful. The Minneapolis School District, as others have mentioned, made this change in the 1990s. About 23% of the Minneapolis students are eligible for English learner services, and 75% of the Minneapolis public schoolrooms have at least one English learner at any given moment. In the spring of 2014, almost 4,000 students in the district were born outside the United States, representing 114 different countries. 93% of English learners qualify for free or reduced lunch, compared with 57% of the non-English learner population. As of 2013, 4% of English learners are also considered homeless or highly mobile. 13.6% of all English learners also qualify for special education services. In the late 90s, the Minneapolis School District tardiness policy provided that a student who has more than 8 unexcused absences or tardies per semester for any one class is automatically dropped from that class. Therefore, a student who sleeps or misses the school bus in the morning, therefore for being tardy or missing the first hour or two of school, is automatically dropped from the class's enrollment list. To avoid having these dropped classes show up on a transcript, the students would often withdraw from that school and re-enroll in a neighboring school, but one still within the Minneapolis School District. At times, there were so many students moving that transcripts couldn't keep up with the movements. For the 1997-98 school year, the Minneapolis Public School District moved high school bell times from 7:15 a.m. to between 8 and 8:15 a.m. The change resulted in statistically more students remaining enrolled in the same district or school. Several subsequent studies of the student performance conducted by the Minneapolis Public School District itself have found that students who remain in their schools or remain in the district have much higher scores on achievement tests and have much higher rates of graduation and school completion than do those students who move from school to school. Having a later start time for the first hour of class appears to have enabled more students not to oversleep and to arrive at school on time. Finally, this fall, the Seattle public school system changed their school start time. Seattle School District serves almost 54,000 students representing many different racial and ethnic groups. To address the issue, the Seattle Public School District formed a stakeholder task force that gathered information from the community and prepared recommendations. As part of that effort, they conducted surveys of the families in the district to find out what their concerns would be if the academic day changed to a later time. The Seattle survey and the analysis offers excellent ideas for any urban school district that seeks to understand the impact of school start time change for their own district. Although the Seattle School Task Force found support for later school times from families across both racial and ethnic lines, the issue that they recommended for greater focus was after-school childcare and after-school student employment. Approximately 50% of students from Pacific Islander, Hispanic, and African American households responded that they care for younger children after school, compared to with between 27 and 43% for other ethnic groups. Although the rate of after-school employment was relatively low for high school population as a whole, the rate of after-school employment among respondents was higher for Native American, African American, and Hispanic students. Even so, those ethnic groups also strongly favored later school start time. The survey also presented various options, including no change at all to the bell time, and asked respondents to indicate their preference. One change option in particular stood out and received strong support, even when analyzed by race and ethnicity. This option was ultimately approved and implemented this past fall. Health, safety, and academic benefits for adolescents from starting school later are clear. How schools get to that goal vary. The journey starts with an uncompromising belief in operating schools in a way that optimizes health and safety so that our children have the best opportunity to achieve. School districts that are determined to obtain this outcome have done so and have documented their path to success. Nothing should stand in Boston's way of following these successful urban school districts. The goal is ours for the taking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Counselor Asabi George.
Thank you. And thank you all again for your testimony and your presentation today. I have a question about tweaking a school schedule at a smaller, in a smaller segment as opposed to pushing the 7:30s to 8:30 or 9. Is there any benefit to pushing up by 20 or 30 minutes, which doesn't quite get us to the recommended start time, but gets us closer and I think is still sensitive to the needs of a lot of our families and kids?
I think if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago, I would have said, and to a certain extent, I still believe that any delay in school start time is going to have some benefit for students. But I think there's an emerging story that this 8:30 start time, because it's not just how much sleep you get, it's when you sleep, that really is critical. And in order for students' schedules to match their circadian underlying biology, that 8:30 start time or later seems to be much more in concert with what the underlying biology looks like, and I think potentially has a huge impact on the benefits that you may see as a result of changing start times. Having said that, I wouldn't discourage you from any movement in that direction, but in a way, if you're going to disrupt the community and you're going to fight this fight, I think it makes sense to go to a time where you're going to be able to get hopefully the largest benefit for the change that you're going to make.
And I would agree with Dr. Owens that that it's almost going from 7:20 to 7:45 or 7:40 is going to have all the negative effects of the disruption and the change without actually yielding the most positive beneficial effects. So I think it's important to try to sort of keep your eye on the prize, as it were. And one of the things, the districts that have gone the 15, 20-minute, it's usually because of concern about the cost of changes to the transportation system. So, the Fairfax County, Virginia, this was, I don't know how many, hundreds of thousands, $900,000 a year, I think, the change in the transportation budget, some fantastic amount. Whereas I think a benefit that you have here in the Boston City Schools is that you don't provide transportation. And so, if anything...
For most of our kids, our students with special needs still many of them still receive transportation, but most of our students don't.
Right. And so, but I mean, in terms of the fleet of 1,000 buses that they have in Fairfax County, I don't know how many vehicles are involved here, but, and furthermore, I would imagine that they're not, one of the issues with the fleet when they're all starting at the same time is that it's, and where they're also transporting the grade school kids, is that it becomes very difficult to move that. And so I'm not saying there wouldn't be any logistical burdens, but it's much less here because they are using public transportation. It may even provide a benefit, as Councilor Tito mentioned, in terms of offsetting the crush of many other people trying to get to their job.
Now, Dr. Ciesler, you had mentioned the organized activities ending at 8 o'clock, and that would be, an ideal place for any organized activities to end. But our students that do work often work later than 8 o'clock. And I think that employment becomes, in effect, their organized activity, which would support an argument for even a later start time the next day.
Right. Well, I was saying that if you're going to keep the start times at 7, then in order to have an 11-hour interval where you don't have school schedule activities, you would need to end at 8. But if you were to move the school start times to 8:30, then that
Brings you to 9:30.
That brings you to 9:30.
Right.
So, which is sort of more in line with what they're actually doing.
What is, I think we sort of talked around it, what is a bedtime, an appropriate bedtime and sleep time? Because I send my kids to bed, doesn't mean that they're falling asleep. What is the actual bedtime and sleep time for teenagers?
One of the things, there actually was a study done, and parents who don't at least have a sort of an official bedtime of 10 p.m., their kids are at higher risk of depression and suicidal ideation. It doesn't mean that it's actually necessarily, World War III enforced every night at exactly 10 o'clock, because sometimes the kids will have other activities, that homework, whatever, but there needs to be a recognition that should be a target.
10 p.m.
Yeah, would be, I think, an ideal.
Yeah, well, I think there is evidence that many teenagers have difficulty falling asleep much before 11. And if they are, if the latest recommendations that came out just this year from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is that adolescents between 13 and 18 get 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. So if you do the math, and they can't fall asleep much before 11. Now, I will say that is further compounded by exposure to screens and texting, and all kinds of other competing priorities for sleep, particularly the screen exposure, because that blue light that's emitted from computer and television screens suppresses the body's release of melatonin and makes it harder to fall asleep. So there are environmental pieces to this, but those augment this underlying biological change that occurs at puberty, but they do not cause, in and of itself, teenagers being unable to fall asleep.
Well, I'm going
And
to
I
save the
would-
10 o'clock clip for when my kids become teenagers. I'm going to
Yeah.
say Dr. Ciesler said so, and that will be the end of
Yeah.
it. I do want to get to my colleagues and let them
I
ask
just
their
want to
questions.
reference what Counselor, is it McCarthy, mentioned, and that is the importance, in keeping with what Dr. Owen said, of getting the gadgets out of the bedrooms, TVs, and so I really think that part and parcel of whatever you decide to do here, there should be a sleep health education program provided to both the children as well as the parents of the children, so that they understand. Because many parents will not have realized the importance. In fact, 70% of parents, when they put a TV in the bedroom, they do so saying that to help the kids fall asleep. No, I bet you weren't. I mean, we were also outliers in terms of parents. You know, my son was like, "Why did I get a sleep doctor for a father?"
Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you. My first question has nothing to do with this, but since we have three experts, I will ask anyway. What's the recommended amount of sleep for a healthy adult?
Excellent. 7 to 9 hours.
7 to 9 hours. Wow.
Yeah, 7 seems to be the break point where if you habitually get less than that, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of health-related and cognitive issues.
And when we say 7 to 9 or 8 to 10, unfortunately, individuals don't get to choose.
Yeah.
They don't get to say, "Well, I only have time for 7," because there are individual differences in the need for sleep. There are very few people who need less than 7, but some people need 8, some people need 9.
Sure. Well, I will see many of my virtually all of my colleagues out very, very late at night at community meetings, and then up again the next morning early at a community meeting. So I'm going to quote this when maybe we can deck out early.
Don't forget that 11-hour interval.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Oh, if only. I don't have many questions. I think, thank you all. This was a very, very informative presentation. The third part, the slides on the outcomes is just remarkable. We've been talking about this for a matter of months now, and it seems to me that most parents seem very excited about this. Some bring legitimate concerns, and Mary, I think you hit it right on the head when you talked about having a robust communication process. But I either hear people saying, "This is great, we need to, my kids half asleep getting out of the house in the morning," or on the other hand, what about school sports? What about after-school activities or work? So it does seem to me that if we could have a consistent model across the board at 8:30 or later, we would not only allow for those after-school activities, jobs, sports, etc., but we could also have these really remarkable outcomes. I mean, one of the statistics that SAT scores go up an average of 200 points. I mean, that's remarkable. That is utterly remarkable. For the top 10% of students increased by more than 200 points, but just everything, I think, underscores the importance of this, and something that I share and appreciate your point of view. One thing you may have heard that is something that Mayor Walsh and the superintendent are tackling are the fact that we have many different models. I think, I'm sure the chairman knows, 27 or 28 different models of schools. Some go K2, some go K5, etc. The fact that we have so many different start times just within our high school models, be it a 6-year starting in 7th grade or a 4-year starting in the 9th grade, was this something that came up in any of your research, or schools like Alexandria or Minneapolis, schools that changed this? Did they have the similar sort of quirk of different school start times, or were all high schools 7:30?
I think Boston is somewhat unusual in
Yeah.
having this tremendous variety.
Yeah.
I think so,
Most
too.
school
Yeah.
districts, they're more
Have a
autocratic.
single-
This bell time is the same across the entire.
Yeah.
And that's because of this tiered busing system in many communities where you have to drop off one group of kids before
Sure.
you go back and pick up another. So all in that one tier, all the schools have to start at the same time,
Yeah.
which you don't have that issue as much here.
And since we have the oldest school in America here, I mean, it's probably evolved over time in a way that didn't happen in other places.
Yeah, and I would say that I think that perhaps bolsters our argument that at least going to a uniform high school start time would be less of a or more achievable given the after-school program, the sports. And it's my understanding, with the exception of Boston Latin School, the oldest school, which participates in the dual county league, most Boston Public High schools play one another. So the sporting event would be less, losing out on opportunities to play other schools, I think, would be less an opportunity, less of a concern. Than perhaps
Counselor
some other-
O'Malley, on regard to the Boston Latin School, there are a number of towns in their school
dual
league
county league,
who
that's right.
are have chapters of Start School Later, and so the people who are heading those town chapters are all trying to get together to see if they can get their athletic conference district to do what the Middlesex League superintendents did.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point. I appreciate that, Mary. Thank you. And we've seen, I think, countless districts across the Commonwealth, certainly across the country, as you guys have alluded to many, that have done this. So this does seem to be, I think, an area where Boston is lagging behind a bit in terms of those after-school activities, vitally important. We can address that while still achieving the good that would come from this. So thank you all for your time. Thank you. Mr.
I'd
Chair.
like to make just a couple of really quick additional comments. And one is this issue of a lot of students think that by sleeping later on the weekends, that they somehow are compensating for the chronic sleep loss that they experience during the week. And in fact, that makes the situation worse and has resulted in a phenomenon which we call social jet lag. Which means that they're trying to push their bedtimes and wake times later on Friday and Saturday night. And then come Sunday night, they're not awake long enough to be able to fall asleep. And it's analogous to flying from Boston to LA and back every weekend. And we know that it takes about 1 day per time zone cross to adjust, and it's always harder coming in the eastward direction. So these kids, think about what you feel like when you're experiencing jet lag. That's what these kids are living under. The other point I wanted to make was, even for those students who don't have, aren't participating in extracurricular activities or jobs, there still is a federal bill in Congress called the Z's to A's Act. That was supported by Representative Lofgren from California. And it was originally framed as an anti-crime and anti-teen pregnancy bill, because the idea was these kids were getting home from school so early that, the interval between them getting home from school and their parents getting home from work was a time where they could really get into trouble. And so I think we not only have to think about when schools start in the morning, but there may be benefits to it ending later as well.
Councilor LaMartina? Yeah. Yes, the BPS is here, and they're on the next panel, so we're gonna, and we also have some students who we want to get home so they can go to sleep. And so
Apparently, they have to go to sleep in about a half an hour. You answered a lot of the questions that I had regarding the number of programs, the Start School Later programs, regarding 57,000. We have 57,000 students here, and most of them are on buses, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. You answered the question about catching up on the weekend. That's really all I have. So it is what it is. But one of the concerns that we talked about is, with the later start time, if schools start at 8:15, and whether it's, we keep talking about sports, but there's theater, there's art, there's music, there's a lot of other things. If there's not starting practice until 4:30, say, instead of 3:30, that's 4:30, 5:30, 6:30, right? Maybe even now by the time the kids get home, it's 7:30. You're going to eat at 7:30, and then you're going to have 2 to 3 hours of homework if they're on top of their ball game, which now puts them back into 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock anyway. So, it's, when Mike said early to bed, early to rise, I started laughing. It must be an old Irish Catholic thing, because my dad always used to pound it in our heads. When you were done with your homework, it was, you had your bowl of ice cream or your glass of milk or whatever you had, and you go to bed, and that was the end of that. And when the alarm clock went off, it was his giant mitts pulling you out of the bed, and off you went. And when I look at the one comparison chart that Councilor O'Malley referenced, it's really interesting data. I don't know what the balance is between comparing that to for home life versus simply sleep deprivation. There's a lot, physical fights, smoke, alcohol use, marijuana use, sexually active, sad or hopeless, considered suicide. I'm tired a lot, but that's not, that doesn't happen a lot. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if you could clarify that chart, where exactly it came from, and what was the data points that you used, because some of them are, the numbers are enormous.
Yeah, I mean, most of these studies that have looked at these kinds of relationships between sleep duration and risk behaviors have controlled for things like not necessarily home environment per se, but socioeconomic status, parental education, looked at differences, potentially related to racial or ethnic minority status. So a lot of those kinds of potential confounding variables are taken into consideration in these studies, and despite controlling for those, they still see these relationships. If that answers your question.
Yeah, it's just there's some consideration with other things, but I will say, Doctor, I made the point earlier, and you emphasized it. I can't tell you. My wife is a school teacher, and there are kids falling asleep in the classroom, and she'll say, "What were you doing last night?" "Oh, I was, face chat until 2, 3." And this is a big parenting issue. And as I said, I have one in college and one in high school. I'm sure in college he has his phone with him now, but he was not allowed to have the phones. We had one terminal in the hallway where all the phones, all the laptops, everything was, and they were not allowed in the room, simply because I knew that I find myself flipping through my smartphone at night when I'm ready to go to bed because I'm trying to catch up on emails. I know if I'm doing it, I'm not going to give them the opportunity.
Right, and Councilor McCarthy, that's a very important point, because at the National Sleep Foundation, we showed that that if the parents are doing it, then the kids are also doing it. And so modeling one's own behavior as well as establishing rules for the kids are very important. That's why the education component of this, I think, is so critical.
Yeah.
But to your point about starting practices at 4:30 and then still being able to get their, is that going to mean that they're going to be up till 10 or 10:30 or whatever, getting their work done? Yes, but they're not going to bed any earlier now as it is, even though they get out at 3:30. So the studies have shown that when the school start times are delayed, actually, if anything, not only does the sleep time go up, but it goes up by more than the amount that the school start times were delayed. So it does not result in a reduction in the amount of sleep.
The other point I would make about that is that when people are sleep deprived, they sacrifice accuracy, sacrifice efficiency for accuracy. So they get the right answer eventually, but it takes them a lot longer to get there. And one of the populations that's been really well studied are medical residents about that. You're just less efficient in your thinking. And so it may be that 3 hours of homework takes 4 hours to complete under conditions of chronic sleep loss. So I think we also have to take into consideration that they may be more efficient students if they're well slept.
Sure. And my last question is just on you're experts in sleep, so I wanted to ask, you better get into that whole blue screen thing, because I've heard about it. I don't know a lot about it, but what exactly? Because we talk about it a lot. If you just sit on a bench out in Faneuil Hall, nobody's paying attention to what anybody's doing. Everybody's head is down. It's a different world. It drives me crazy. People walking out in the middle of traffic, they're not paying attention to anything. I don't know if it's just sleep or it's just this has become like you're addicted to it.
The blue and rich light that is emitted from those phones, we actually have specialized photoreceptors in the retina that are not the rods and cones, that probably during evolution came from when they're vestigial from marine organisms, and they're most sensitive to the light that marine organisms are exposed to, which is the blue light that they're in the blue oceans and under the blue sky. And so and it's a specialized photoreceptor that's in ganglion cells. It's got a specialized photopigment, so it's not rhodopsin that's in the rods or the conopsins that are in the red, green, and blue cones, but it is actually called melanopsin, and it is most sensitive to this 460 to 480 nanometers, this blue enriched light. Now, ironically, the reason why the Nobel Prize was awarded a couple of years ago to the development of the blue LED is because prior to that, when I was in college, the only LEDs were red and green, and they were used to, for see if your stereo was on or not.
Right.
Because nobody could make white light from those. It was only the discovery of how to make a blue LED that revolutionized this and made it possible to create white light from LEDs, which are much more energy efficient. So that's great. The only thing is that in these LED, and that's what's powering our screens on our laptops and cell phones and tablets. But that is directly resetting the internal clock much more effectively than the longer wavelengths that we used to get from incandescent lamps. And because it is so blue enriched. Now there are things that, so after we did this, showed that reading from an iPad shifts your circadian rhythms and suppresses melatonin and makes it harder for you to get up in the morning. Then Apple has now come out with some software in their new iPhones. It's called the Night Shift, which you can engage, and there's also something for Androids that reduces the blue enriched light in your phone after dusk. So you can set it between sunset and sunrise to decrease the blue wavelengths in those phones. And you can also set an appropriate interval for you to remind you to go to bed. So you can set a bedtime alarm instead of just a wake time alarm.
Pretty cool. I will look up the Night Shift app.
Okay. There you go. Counselor, I'm sorry, Counselor Flaherty.
Thank you, Mr.
Not Counselor Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I slid over. Where was this doctor when I had 6 a.m. hockey games and practices? Just a couple quick questions because I know we need to move on to the panel. In jurisdictions that are changing their school start times, are they also changing their youth sport times, their standardized test times, their civil service exam times? A lot of what we do around here is around the school schedule, but also particularly the weekends with youth sports, and then the standardized tests, whether it's the SATs and/or the civil service exams here. Everything's cock-a-doodle-doo. It's first thing in the morning. So
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Counselor. Start School Later has been talking with the organization that runs the SAT and the ACT exams. It is really kind of silly that these kids are they're trying to take such life-changing exams at dark 30 on a Saturday morning. So Start School Later's on it. We're trying.
good, very good.
And we actually got the College Board to give us from something like 20 years of reading exams, reading comprehension exams, paragraphs that they were no longer using. And we administered them in volunteers at the Brigham and Women's Hospital all different times of day. And 8 a.m. is the absolute worst performance of all of the participants who we studied. And it's about a 20% decrease in their performance in terms of this daily circadian rhythm of alertness and performance. So it's your even ability to remember what was in the passage is severely degraded at that time.
And then you had touched on it, sort of, there's maybe an obstacle. Every kid is different and every family situation is different. In my household, my two oldest, you had to roust out of bed and you'd be chasing them to make sure that they were getting something to eat and brushing their teeth before they went off to school. My two youngest, my twins, they get themselves up and they insist on being to school an hour before school starts. That's just the way they're wired. And in a transition period, so you go through, and I'll just give an example of my Michael, who you had to roust out of bed, is now a freshman in college with a 8 a.m. Monday morning statistics class. So I guess the question is, when you transition from high school to college, a little bit of a rude awakening if you're starting school much later, and now it's, it's a sink or swim environment at the college level, and you get 8 a.m. classes. Have you noticed any sort of issues with high school is now transitioning into college, and then the start times are completely different, as well as there's probably, I'm assuming, if it was like it was for me in college, there's less sleep time going on. But
I teach a couple of college classes, and the students, many of them, try to do whatever they can to avoid those very early morning.
He would have too. He would have also, but it's a core requirement. So
right,
all of them have to be there at 8 a.m. So he would have.
So So, and some schools don't even have courses that start before 9. But I think it's something that we have to begin to work with the colleges as well. And we've just created, thanks to a generous gift from the Snyder Family Foundation, we've just created a Sleep 101 for college students, and we're starting to work with colleges across the country to try to change the start times of their classes as well.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. I guess I don't particularly have questions other than, do you have any information about length of school day? Is that affected in terms of how long a school day? So one of the theories has been, hey, why don't we move the school days to the same as work days, right, and around the same time frame, as well as length. Is there any data around the length of school day? And I know I'm not going to be popular with the students who are in the room with that question, but
Well, there is a huge effort. In fact, I think in the last 2 years, $4 billion has been spent on work to try to extend the school day. So it is a much more well-funded, well-oiled operation than the start school later activities. And some of them are even suggesting that the school day should be expanded on both ends. That is, they start earlier and later. We would vehemently disagree with the notion of starting earlier. A lot of the motivation for ending later, besides having more time for instruction, is actually to integrate sporting activities and so on within that time frame. I remember when former Governor Deval Patrick came to our town and was talking about extending the school day. And he was getting a lot of blowback from the students. I stood up and said we should actually start later, and the whole place erupted in cheers. And then he said, you're just cravening to the crowd here. But no, I don't think that it should be expanded in the starting earlier direction.
yeah. And I guess the thing that I would just note is that one of the biggest objectives that we have in the Boston Public Schools is to close the achievement gap. And so what the data that you've laid out in terms of actual outcomes, I haven't seen too many other levers or switches that had that type of epinephrine, even though it costs more now, but that type of jump that you would see. And one of the other pieces I see on the bottom here said effects of first period classes larger for Black students. In Boston, some of the worst transportation options are in Mattapan, right? So they're going the furthest. They have a tougher time getting to schools. So there's a disparity there, and there's also a disparity in how folks are doing. And I want to thank the Massachusetts chapter of Start School Later, because you're also bringing up that other districts that don't look like our district are the ones who are moving towards this, and that urban districts are not. And so we have an opportunity to help our young people, GPAs, and also that there's a great disparity that disadvantaged kids do actually better in this space. And that's a good disparity to have on the table. So I would just say I'm very encouraged by the passion, but also by the science and data that go, and that's what we should be oriented by. We can deal with the obstacles, and in government we deal with and tweak obstacles on a regular basis. But the objective should be, let's do the smartest thing for the largest group of young people, and to institute policies that actually help our young people. Show me something else where we can get the 200-point increase in SATs, and we'd be jumping at it in a second. So I think there's something, as noted, we will definitely be pushing forward with working groups to advance, I believe, this really, really important issue. I'm going to call, and I want to thank you for coming today.
You're
I'm going to
welcome.
call our next expert panel. We're going to actually take both of them at the same time. Can we do it? Yep. John Hanlon, Chief of Operations for Boston Public Schools. Monica Roberts, Chief of Engagement, Assignment, and Partnerships for Boston Public Schools. Monica, that sounds like you got you didn't get a raise, you just got more titles? That's normally how it works in government when we give you more responsibility. So we want to thank you for coming. Okay. Oh, okay. 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 If you can introduce yourself for the record, and you can start with your testimony.
Sure. John Hanlon, Chief of Operations with Boston Public Schools.
And Monica Roberts, Assistant Superintendent of Engagement for Boston Public Schools.
Okay. I'm sorry. I gave you a demotion, the Assistant Superintendent. Okay.
That's a very short title. So we do not have a formal presentation prepared today. We were asked to attend the hearing in order to speak to this and to discuss potential options that BPS could explore. We look forward to taking part in the working session that Councilor Asabi George had mentioned earlier today, and can reference some thought that's going on right now in the district around high school start time changes. We've been mindful of this discussion over the last year plus, really. I've seen some of the presentations, not just that were presented today by the expert panel earlier, and I thank them for coming and sharing their thoughts, but also presentations that some of them, including Dr. Owens, had led last year. So really just open to thoughts or suggestions that the council might have for us to bring into the working session.
Okay. Councilor, well, the first piece is, have you done any financial analysis on any of the potential effects? One of the things I actually disagreed with the school department about is the transportation component, but we do not have a bus for 7th through 12th graders.
Yeah, so we could.
So the question is do you see a potential financial impact on making this shift?
There would be a financial impact on this shift. It's unclear yet as to what that financial impact might be. It's not accurate to say that we don't provide busing for any high school students, and I know that you know that as well. And Councilor Asabi George had pointed out before that our special education students in high school, the large majority of them are receiving bus service. And in fact, for high schools across the district, there are actually 576 trips a day. That's combined between AM and PM. So it's more significant than people would think, even though by and large, the vast majority of high school students are transported via TPAS.
That's great. Councilor Asabi George?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask you, John, thank you very much for coming today, Monica as well, about the trips and the number of buses that would be impacted. And sort of in general, I think one of the biggest challenges as a city and as a department is that we hesitate to do it for so long. So it would be a dramatic change, I think an emotional change as well as a logistical change for the city. And if you could just share with us maybe some of your initial thoughts, and again, I understand that it's initial, about what some of those challenges would be in addition to transportation.
Yeah, certainly the transportation is a part of it, and something that we're looking at right now. We're also in talks with the athletics department to make sure that a bell time change for high schools wouldn't negatively impact the high school sports schedule. We also need to determine whether or not there are any ill effects to later start times on youth employment, things of that nature. So all of these things are items that we're exploring right now, while also weighing the seemingly positive evidence that the panel before you presented related to later start times being good for student health and wellness, and also potentially even school performance.
And I imagine that there's, and Monica, if you want to jump in, please do. I imagine that there would also need to be some collaboration with the T, because most of our high school students, many of our high school students do use the MBTA to get to and from school, and what sort of impacts that might have on that T system, which we know is under an incredible amount of pressure as it is.
Right. And Councilor O'Malley had made this point earlier on, I believe. One thing that would be a bit of a concern if we were to move high school starts to 8:30, which is already the heaviest tier, so to speak, with regards to the number of schools. If we moved it to 8:30 and many of those students are then taking the T, you're then right into the busiest time period for the MBTA as well. So we would need to talk to the T about what implications that might present.
And do we know what the average commute time is for our students as it is right now?
It's not something that I know. We could find out and get back to you. Monica, do you know?
No, I think it varies because we have students, as Councilor Jackson said, that may be coming as far as Mattapan, going to Charlestown or West Foxway. So I think it widely varies, and it's something that we can see if we can get an average for.
I think that would be interesting information, sort of the average length, and then maybe a sampling of some of the longest lengths of times that our students are traveling to get from home to school every day.
Councilor Sabi George, I just want to jump in. The data, there was a data analysis when there was a vote. Actually, when we took up 6th, 7th, and 8th grade transportation, so there was an analysis on the record around the distance that young people traveled, the routes that they take, and the peak times, and even whether or not the buses were going to be full. So there's a great deal of robust information in that space for you. That was a couple years ago, but I'm sure that would be a great place to start. So I just wanted to jump in on that.
Thank you. And thank you both for being here today. I do think it was incredibly important for you to be here while the sort of the professionals and adolescents sleep spoke to us. So thank you. Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor O'Malley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Several of my colleagues mentioned the Poor Richard's Almanac quotation, early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. It was coined by Benjamin Franklin, who dropped out of the Boston Public Schools, perhaps because they started too early. So sorry that Councilors Flaherty and McCarthy left. I mean, it's often hard to do things in this building and in all levels of government. So this will be an adjustment, but again, I think that there is conclusive evidence that this is worth our undertaking. How many, and I may have the number somewhere, or perhaps Councilor Sabi George knows, how many different start times are there for the high school students?
Altogether, there are about 12.
12.
We have about almost 20 that start before 7:30. So our early start time is what the majority of our schools have.
And how many high schools are there? 40?
They're
A
less
little
than
under 40.
Third.
37 total that go up to the 12th grade. That includes all programs, including alternate education.
Okay, fair enough. So we've got 12 different. So at a minimum, what would be the concern? And the late, so the earliest is 7:20.
Mm-hmm.
Half of them start before 7:30.
Yeah.
And the latest is do we have
9:30.
9:30 is our start. So to change them all to 8, what would it entail to change them all to 8:30?
So I'll let John talk about from an operational standpoint, but I think from the engagement of families, we need to have some conversation about the benefits of this. So our panel really spoke well to the fact that there are concerns around sports, around students who are employed and need to be employed in some cases. But there are also the benefits that we then need to have conversations with families about. So I think really educating our families and community about the need will be critical, a critical part of this process.
Completely understood and completely agree, but just statutorily or in terms of operations, what would need to happen for every high school to start at 8:30 at the minimum?
There's not necessarily that much that would need to happen in order to do it. And we have to assess what the financial impact would be, if it would be more costly. It seems like it would if we were to move to 8:30 for all schools. I understand your question, Counselor, would be to make it more uniform across the district for all schools, correct? All high schools?
That's correct.
Yeah. One thing that I think is worth noting, too, is that even though there might be 12 different start times for high schools, the day lengths vary a little bit as well. And many of the schools are within a very small range of times. So just between, say, 7:15 and 7:30 alone, you have 3 different or 4 different start times, but you have about half of our high schools, right? But it's all within a compressed time period. So making the start time more uniform is certainly something that would be desirous of, but it's not necessarily a be-all, end-all if those variations in start time are slight, if you see what I'm saying. But operationally, the steps that would need to happen would be to, number one, assess the financial impact of that. I believe we would then need to put something in front of the school committee to make sure that this major policy move would be voted on or agreed to by the school committee. We then need to work with Monica's team to make sure that it's socialized, both in the communities served by those schools, but also the school leaders in particular. We would then have to build out in the bus routing for next year with those new times in mind, so that all buses are going to the right times. All the families with children on those buses are notified of these time changes. Those are the major operational elements that would have to unfold.
So could this conceivably be implemented in the 2017-2018 school year?
It could. That would be ambitious, but it could.
But that would allow for enough time to the parental engagement piece, sort of the cost associated with it. And the earliest a school starts at 7:20, and what time would that school day end approximately? I know there'd be some different schools have different lengths of day, but we're looking at a 1:30 end time.
1:40, 1:50.
1:41, so before 2 o'clock. And then for 9:30 a.m. start time, does that go all the way to 3:30 in the afternoon?
Just about, yes.
Okay. And what's the 9:30 school start time?
So the start time or the end?
Which schools start at 9:30?
There's actually only one, and it's one of our special education schools.
Okay.
And so the other thing I would want to add, as we're thinking about this, there are some of our students so for example, we have Boston Day and Evening Academy, which provides support for students who are not able to do a morning course for lots of reasons. They may have children or other things, and so we want to also be thinking about that as we're having this conversation.
I certainly wouldn't suggest that we change Boston Day and Evening Academy or other alternative high schools or specialty, but for sort of the majority of our high school seats, I think that's what we're talking about today. And so so we need to assess what the financial impact would be.
Mm-hmm.
We need to deal with the three sort of legs of the school: transportation, after-school athletics / clubs, youth employment, and then conduct an aggressive outreach to both school leaders, parents, and families.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. And in your opinions, is there any reason why we shouldn't pursue this?
It's hard to say right now without having all the data or all the evidence in front of us. And certainly it's
That's
something
fair.
that we're
And I don't mean to
exploring.
put either of you on the spot, but I guess for me, I think this is something incredibly worthwhile. Again, I have heard from parents who say, "What about after-school activities?" I don't see that as, or after-school jobs. I don't see that as being as impacted as many people may have fears. I think that we can address that while at the same time providing, supports for our kids by giving them that later start time. I think the data speaks for itself, and it's something that we really need to get behind, in my opinion. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
If I might, just to chime in with something briefly, what would be exploring wouldn't be necessarily, sticking with where we're at or moving only to 8 a.m. or 8:30. We're exploring all potential start time options. So what would a 9:30 start time look like for high schools? What would an 8:30 look like? What would a 7:30, continue to look like if they all were at that time? Just to clarify that.
No, I
we're
appreciate that,
really
yeah.
exploring all options there.
Yeah. Councilor Lamatita.
Thank you. I just have one quick question. I really believe that the professionals really makes my case that we should do late times. But the financial costs, do we have to negotiate this with the unions?
We wouldn't have to negotiate the start times of our schools.
You wouldn't have to do
with
that?
the unions, no.
All right, because that was a cost I was worrying about, that we would have to pay the teachers more money to start work later.
Well,
So we wouldn't have to. You could,
I-
is it the superintendent?
I do believe that school site councils, individual school site councils would have a role in the changing of a school's time. I also think that a faculty senate may also play a role. I don't want to speak
Right.
out of school, but
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
think
when
that's-
you're talking to the operations
Yes.
chief, I'm thinking about my operations unions. I cannot speak for the Boston Teachers Union. It would be a change in working conditions for teachers, I would imagine.
teachers.
So that may require negotiations. I really can't speak to that.
Okay.
Okey-doke.
Thank you.
So I guess my only case would be in terms of closing the achievement gap, which has been one of the primary issues, are there other things that we know of that 5 out of 6 schools showed significant increases in GPA pre and post in English, math, science, social studies that benefit disadvantaged students more, or that are going to add 200 points to SATs? Are there any other? Because if there are, I want to consider those too. But the reason why I bring them up is that the compelling data here is that this is transformative, and that in particular in a place where achievement gap is real in all urban districts, and it sounds like urban districts are the ones that are less likely to do this. So I would just push that we lead and not follow in this space. We have an opportunity to do some really transformative things for young people who need it, and I appreciate Councilor O'Malley's urgency. Just as the doctor said, you can't go back and catch up on sleep. It doesn't work that way. Well, we can't go back and catch up on a young person's education. And so I think it's so critical that we front load this literally as soon as possible. Yes, we have to, and you do an amazing job, Monica, with the engagement piece. We can do this. And we had conversations throughout the city of Boston around transportation. This is a quality. This is not only, it's a quality and performance change, and also has positive outcomes relative to wellness for our young people. So I think we are, as the doctor noted earlier, if we do nothing, then we are doing harm. This is one of the few things that I've seen in education that it seems to me to be something that we need to study less because we have the data here, and move faster on that would actually make a difference. The young people for next year's graduating class need a 200-point injection. Actually, I needed a 200-point injection in my SATs. I wish we could go back on that also. So I just think that we should work together and actually make sure that we're doing this that's the best and the latest and greatest. And it sounds as if the experts, as well as the people who've done it, like Councilor Asabi George, who's been in the classroom, and also just from the practical perspective of so many young people living in parts of the city that don't have the best when it comes to transportation, being able to get to school and to be present. So really look forward to working with you. We are going to have our last, but I think one of the most important, no disregard to the folks at BPS and the doctors, but we have absolute subject matter experts who are going to be coming before us. We have students. We have Edward Tapia, who is the alternative student representative on the BPS school committee, and he's a junior at Excel High School. And we have Leslie Carranza, who's currently a freshman and a cheerleader at Boston Latin Academy. And we'd like you to come forward. I do have to brag a little bit on Boston Latin Academy. Right now, we actually just got to go there, and congratulations. Boston Latin Academy is the #1 school in the state of Massachusetts for college acceptance rates, and really great things happening there. So we're very proud of what happened there. Also, the co-founder of, I don't know if you were there that day, the co-founder of Airbnb went to Boston Latin Academy. So that's pretty cool. And Excel, I heard that you guys have a really great new partnership around science, technology, engineering, and math. So we will probably be working for you someday very soon. So we look forward to your testimony. And if you can introduce yourself for the record.
Okay. Hello, city councilors, students, and guests. My name is Edward Tapia, and I am a junior at Excel High School. I am also a member of the Boston Student Advisory Council and student alternate student representative for the Boston School Committee. I'm here to speak about the benefits and challenges of us. Wait, I just introduced myself?
Go ahead.
You go right ahead. No, you go right ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I'm here to speak about the benefits and challenges of a later school start time from the perspective of the students. Here are some arguments in favor of a later start time for students. Currently, students have to wake up in the dark and are expected to function. We don't have time to take care of ourselves. We are told to get sleep and get a good breakfast, but are not given the ability to do so. Students often feel tired after starting the day. BPS has all the evidence that waking at extremely early hours is harmful for student minds and bodies that are still developing. It is frustrating that they choose to ignore this fact. Most adults begin work at 9 a.m., while many students have already been working for 2 hours by then. Why do we require students to do something that is not expected of adults? With that said, we also have some concerns. We know that a later school start time means a later end time. This would make it much more difficult for students to hold jobs that they need to support themselves and their families, to be involved in extracurricular activities like BSAC, sports, and to finish homework in time to get some sleep. Another issue is traffic. A lot of students already have a long commute. If we have a later start time, the commute would be during rush hour, making it even longer. How would you avoid this scenario? And finally, we've been told that if the order is passed, schools will start within an hour of each other. Does that mean that the schools will also end within an hour of each other? Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. Leslie?
Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Carranza. I'm a student at Boston Latin Academy, and I personally oppose starting later due to the fact that I am a cheerleader. So after school, I go straight to cheerleading, and I live in Alston. So going from Alston to Dorchester takes about 45 minutes every day. So on a normal day, I wake up at 5, leave the house by 6 to catch the 6:10 bus, which if I miss it, luckily I can still get to school by the time of 6:20 before the bell starts. And we end at 1:40, which is really convenient because students do work or do extracurricular activities. The cheerleaders go from 2:15 until 4:15, while the football players go from 2:15 until 5:30 and still have homework to do. I just feel that transportation, if we all start later, knowing that rush hour starts at a certain hour, students and adults will be bumping into each other with elementary school students, but we don't take into account that elementary school students start around 8:30, 9:30, and if we actually go later, we will be intervening with them. And then starting later, well, some parents have to say that we are leaving our house too early, which is like going into the dark. And if we start later, we're going to be back at point zero where we're coming home in the dark and parents are still afraid that something might happen to us. And I think just extracurricular activities, if we go later from around 3:30, I'm still going to be getting home at around 6, 7:30, not being able to do homework, pushing back my sleep, waking up at 5 with only 4 hours. Thank you.
Thank you. For the record, Leslie is an intern in my office. I would like to hear from both of you, if you would just share a few comments, a few sentences about sort of your sleep habits. Like, what time do you go to bed? Are you bringing the phone with you? When are you falling asleep as opposed to going to bed? And, you can even reference, if you don't want to talk about yourself, you can talk about your friends.
So by the time I get home from anything, BSAC, or any other activity or event that I have during the day, it's probably by 8 p.m. So I have dinner, take a shower like everyone, and start homework around 9. This year, I have an AP class, AP Government, and that class usually takes 2 hours, almost 3 of homework. And then I have my usual homework, which also takes about 2 hours. And that's 5. If we do the math, I end up going to bed around 2 a.m. almost.
And then what time are you up to get ready to go to school?
I get up at 5:30, giving me about almost 4 tops. So I'll be lucky if I get to sleep 5 hours.
Very good.
By the time that I get home on a daily basis, it's around 6. So it gives me an hour to just, if I need to take a nap or just chill in bed, to stay there and just mentally prepare myself for the homework that's prepared. I think Boston Latin Academy is known for the amount of homework we get, which fluctuates between 2 to like 5 hours of homework. Knowing that I have 3 honors classes in one day is like hard, and on top of getting home, just mentally preparing myself for another day. But I think by the time that I am done with homework, it's around 9 o'clock, and then I give myself an hour to eat, to take a shower. By the time that I'm in bed by 10, watch YouTube videos like a normal teen, catch up on TV or all the gossip around. And by that time that I'm ready to prepare myself to go to bed, 10:30, lights out, I'm asleep by 11. And then I wake up at 5:30 and eat everything again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you both for your testimony. I was your age when I first testified in this chamber in those very seats on an education matter way back in the mid-1990s, long before you guys were born. So I look forward to seeing you guys sitting on this side of the table someday. And it's not easy, so we really appreciate it. But I'm intrigued because I have heard, as I said, heard from many parents, have heard from some young adults as well, who seem to really support this idea. And I think you both articulated how hectic the life of an involved student can be. And do either of you work you work at BSAC and you have a part-time job as well? So some of those days can, that's great that you get to bed around 10:30, but I assume some days it's later. And I hope to gosh that some of those 2:30 days you get some earlier nights. But do you feel as though a later so BLA starts at what time?
Around 7.
7:30, and you get out at 1:40, so that gives you enough time because cheerleading starts around 2:30, so it gives you a little bit of a break and then to get over. And what time does Excel start?
Cell starts at 7:25.
Okay, and gets out around the same time, 1:45 or so.
Yep.
Okay. Do you feel that a minor so if we were to go for again, I think 8:30 is what we should be looking at, but mindful of things can change. So if a half-hour delay, so an 8 a.m. start for your schools, it would push things back. Do you feel, though, that window between the dismissal bell and your cheerleading or after-school work, that you need that time? You couldn't adjust that a little bit so that you could have a later start time while still keep your hectic schedule?
Well, I believe that if we push back the time an hour, like 8:30, that's usually when there's a lot of traffic around Dorchester or I don't know, South End.
So your concern seems to be more of the implementation of a later start time, that kids would be late, you'd be late, it'd be more stress.
So I believe that if, us as students, we can manage our time better, just to the focus of getting more sleep, it is possible, but it would be much more easier for us if we had a later start time. At the same time, I'm looking at the fact that the Boston traffic is not the nicest and most welcoming.
No.
So during rush hour to get to school, regardless of MBTA or if your parents are taking you or if you're in one of the school buses, you might have a 30-minute delay just because of a rush hour, which extends that time, that commute that you take from getting from home to school. And also coming out of school later, if we come out at 2:45, it's almost rush hour in the afternoon, which also extends that time that we get from school, let's say to work or to some activity or home. So it fluctuates a lot with traffic, but I also think that if we have shuttle buses that takes us directly from the nearest station where you live, then that time period, that commute could be shortened by some extent.
And where do you live now?
I live in South Boston.
Okay, so you have an Excels in South Boston.
I live a 20-minute walk.
So do you typically walk?
I typically walk because if I take the bus, it'll be about 40 minutes instead.
And we've seen 100 people waiting for the bus in many South Boston stops. And how do you get from Alston or Brighton?
Alston.
How do you get from Alston to Townsend Street?
I take the 66 to 23, but our school does provide a shuttle bus, but that shuttle bus is not reliable at all.
Really?
I feel like every day when I text my friend, oh, is the shuttle bus on its way? It's either late, comes early, I miss it, or it's just not going to show up
And is it direct to drops you off at the front
in front of my
door
school.
of BLA? So if you can't take the shuttle bus, then how do you?
If I take the shuttle bus, it gives me 30 extra minutes to sleep, and then the bus will be there by 7:20. No, 6:20. Sorry, school starts at 7:20. It gives me more time to actually like read on the bus, do homework, and still like not worry about taking the next bus stopping at Dudley early in the morning, freezing in the winter, knowing how Boston's climate is. So I think shuttle buses are more convenient if we're looking at a later start time.
Even though it's a little inconsistent.
Even if
So if you don't take the shuttle bus, you just take the
The
bus to
66.
bus and then switch at Dudley. Okay, good. Thank you both. Thank you.
Is that
Madam
bus,
Chair.
is that a T bus or is
It's
it a
an
school
MBTA
bus?
bus.
MBTA bus, but specific for Latin Academy?
Mhm.
Very good.
It's called the S bus, Madam Chair. Which
I'm
we have
sorry I didn't go
for-
to Latin Academy or Boston Latin School. I went to Boston Tech. We didn't get a special bus. Thank you both for sharing today. And I know, Edward, you've been doing so much work. I've witnessed personally since coming on the council. And Leslie, we're so happy to have you in our office. And thank you for testifying today, even though it's in differing opinion than I have. But I appreciate that. Thank you. At this time, we're going to start with public testimony. Again, please keep your comments, if you can, to just a few minutes. And we'll start with Deb Putnam. And you can come down to, this podium here. That would be great. And then Celia Kirwan will be next. Thank you.
Kind of empty in here now, but
Thank you. That's okay. The viewers at home will
yeah.
appreciate your testimony.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, and thank you, Councilors O'Malley, Asabi George, and Jackson for sponsoring this hearing. Really appreciate it. And thank you all your other councilors for listening on the video that you're not here right now. Really appreciate it. So my name is Deb Putnam, and I'm a parent of 2 Boston public school students. I live in Roslindale. The start times of my high schools the teenagers attend are 7:20 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. As you heard earlier, in fact, 50% of Boston public schools, high schools start before 7:30, contrary to medical recommendations you've heard here today. These start times are detrimental to Boston public school students and families across the city. I am the Boston chapter leader of Start School Later. We started when a group of parents came together in 2014 in response to our personal experiences with family sleep debt and galvanized by the plethora of medical and educational data on the benefits of later school start. We currently have over 100 supportive parents on email lists and through Facebook, and we know there are many more. I have spoken in particular with parents of children with chronic medical and mental health conditions that are greatly exacerbated with lack of sleep. Since forming our group, we have conducted education and discovery primarily at Boston Latin Academy to understand what students, parents, teachers, and administrators think about sleep and school start times. We also network with other Boston public high schools. We've talked with many, many parents, school leaders, health professionals, teachers, students, administrators, the BPS Wellness Council, BPS Athletics, and the BTU, all of whom are supportive of later school start time. We've also spoken with several media outlets, WGBH, Fox, WCVB, Boston Globe, Community News, and shared our efforts with interested college and graduate students, one of whom is here tonight, I believe. The vast majority of people with whom we speak believe in the research, support this effort, and want to know when BPS is going to make the change. I'll share with you a bit of data that shows the sleep status of 10th grade BLA students. For those who do not know, there's not many people left who may not know, but BLA is one of the most diverse high schools in the city, and 61% of students qualify for free or reduced lunch. This survey was conducted in spring 2015 in homerooms with iPads with 82% response rate, so almost all the kids responded. The survey showed that 40% of students wake up at or before 5:30 a.m. 10th graders at Boston Latin Academy. 44% of students get 7 hours or less of sleep at night. 39% get 6 hours of sleep or less a night. Less than 4% get 8 hours of more sleep per night. And you've heard the recommendations earlier about the amount of sleep that young people should be getting. So as you can see, both sleep quality and quantity is deeply compromised, impacting academic achievement and health. In separate surveys, 50% of BLA staff and 78% of parents want a later start time. This demonstrates that parents, students, and teachers are unhappy with the current start time. So instead of thinking of it as a change effort, like what could be possible, folks should know that people are unhappy with the current start time. We've encountered very few teachers who disagree. They know the students and they believe the research, as I think you've mentioned before to me, Counselor. Most teachers know, high school teachers know not to give a test the first period of the day. We have spoken with parents who disagree, some of whom may be here today. For many parents, thinking about a change adds another complication to an already busy early morning or afternoon routine. But as we transferred car seats from car to car in the pouring rain, brought our unhappy child to be immunized, or tightened the strap of a bicycle helmet, we can do this too. We know that low-income families and families of color disproportionately bear the burden of many public health indicators, such as access to healthy foods, open green spaces, quality transportation, air quality. The same is true for sleep, as you've heard earlier. An equity assessment must be conducted to identify the impact of start times on Boston's marginalized populations. Our BLA survey found that 36% of 10th grade students held an after-school job. So just speaking to that after-school employment need. But we asked when the start time was of the job, and 82%, it was 4 p.m. or later. So if our school ended an hour later, which would be 2:20 p.m., those students would still be able to make their start time of their school. So it shows that a commonly assumed barrier, that of after-school jobs, may not be so significant. The City of Seattle has done a great equity assessment, and that's available online. So in our work over the past 2 years, we have not found BPS district leaders, all due respect, I don't think they're here anymore, one's here, committed to this issue. This is really surprising for a district that's committed to achievement gap, lessening the achievement gap. We did hear that there was a small group of high-level administrators who met once early this year and decided that later school start times could not be pursued. We asked why. There was no rationale provided. So we're really happy to hear that there are working groups in conversation. That's totally news to us. And again, we have this network of great parents, so we're interested in engagement should that come about. So we ask you, the City Council, to enact a resolution requiring the Boston Public Schools to adopt the recommended school start time of 8:30 or later for middle and high school students. We ask you to make sure an equity impact assessment is part of this effort. We also request that schools that want to adopt a later school start time as soon as possible be supported to do so. I believe BLA is one such school. There are tons of resources to help the city move forward. As was mentioned earlier, the Massachusetts Start School Later Network is part of that. The City of Seattle conducted an equity analysis. That stuff is online. There's a document called the Blueprint for Change, which outlines this very clearly, and there's many more. I just want to say thanks very much for holding this hearing, and we look forward to working with you and your working groups.
Thank you. Celia. And then we'll have Kim Foltz and Jeffrey Club.
Good afternoon, and thank you for sponsoring this hearing, and thanks for everybody here listening to this very important topic. My name's Celia Kerwin, and I'm the parent of 2 teenage boys at Boston Latin Academy, and BLA, as you've heard, has got a 7:20 start. We live less than 2 miles away as the crow flies in Jamaica Plain, and yet my sons have to be up at 6 to make school on time. Friends of theirs who live further afield, such as the outer reaches of Dorchester or in Ulston, Brighton, have got a far earlier start when they're fogged with sleep. Although the weather today still feels more like summer, it's actually October the 17th, and we're a couple weeks away from the fallback clock change. It's going to make those early mornings even darker. So it's 5:25. I'd like to invite you to briefly shut your eyes, but please don't fall asleep. Take a couple deep breaths, quiet your mind. Imagine what a great school day could look like for our middle and high school students. What might that look like? How might that feel for all of our students, our teachers and staff, our parents and families? How would we feel offering the best of all possible days to our students? I'm sure maybe some of you have jumped to the opportunity of totally reinventing the school day. We're not asking you to do that yet, but we are asking you to consider how the 180 days of the school year start. For the majority of our middle and high school students, it's very early, and you can all influence that. Your leaders, your influencers. And as I've heard, many of you are parents too. We're asking you to consider later school start time, to adopt the American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines that no middle or high school starts before 8:30. Change is hard. The status quo can be a very comfortable place. The paradox of the change that we're asking you to consider today is that while the evidence for recommending later school start time is compelling, given deeper understanding of adolescent biology with relation to sleep, and while we all claim to hold in our hearts that we want to do the best for our students, nothing's moving in this area. Boston sees itself as a leader for this nation in many areas. It's one of the reasons that drew me here as a grad student. But are we leading in this area? Over 50% of the high schools start before 7:30. This question related to later school start time is not a new issue. A decade ago, BPS sponsored a study entitled Boston Plan for Excellence, which recommended a later school start time to be piloted to measure its impact and cost. It was never done. In the past 10 years, as you've heard today, many urban school districts have made the move. You've heard about the experiences of Minneapolis and other school districts and the results that they've achieved. So are we in Boston leading in this important area? I'd like you to hold up a mirror to your own heart and head and ask whether you, as a leader and influencer in this city, are exercising your leadership responsibility with respect to later school start. What do you see in your mirror? What obstacles, real or imagined, are we putting in the path of this potential change? I would attest, if we're honest with ourselves, when we look into our mirrors, beyond seeing ourselves, many of the things we see reflecting back at us are tail wagging the dog issues, such as transportation, athletics, after-school jobs. At BLA, when we started investigating barriers raised by parents and family during our discovery process, we learned that transportation is increasingly becoming a moot point. There aren't as many buses for 7th and 8th graders beyond the shuttles. They've been replaced with T-passes. Athletic schedules, when we spoke with the BPS athletics director, we learned that our students are often sitting on the bus waiting for other schools to finish. And after-school jobs, a survey of BLA students showed that the majority of these jobs, as you heard from Deb, started after 4. That's not to dismiss that there are some tougher challenges out there, such as students who are responsible for younger siblings, often where affordable after-school programs are lacking. We need to have open minds, readiness, and willingness to look at the obstacles and test whether our belief about these obstacles as barriers are real or imagined. Without open hearts and minds, readiness and willingness, it's all too easy to put the issue of later school start time in the too difficult box, but it's been there for too long. School budgets are always tight. As leaders, we must demonstrate the justifiable value of budget spend. From an outcome perspective, if you are a leader and you knew that your budget was funding suboptimal results, what would you do? I'm sure you'd make a change. Nobody wants to throw potential or money away. When we polled students at BLA and asked them, at what point in the school day do you feel awake and ready to learn? 60% of the 10th graders said 9 o'clock or later. For BLA, this means that the first 2 teaching periods of the day and the related budget is not achieving the desired result. We're wasting both potential and dollars. Boston, we can do better, much better. Much better is not more studies. Much better is action, and action needs to be now. Please consider to enact the resolution requiring the Boston Public Schools to adopt the American Academy of Pediatrics later school start time of 8:30 or later. Thank you for listening and your dedication to the City of Boston and to the academic success of all our students.
Thank you. Kim Foltz, and then Jeffrey Klug.
Hi, my name is Kim Foltz. I live in East Boston. I'm the parent of a 7th grader who just started at Boston Latin Academy. We feel incredibly blessed to have this incredible public school available to our son. But at the same time, I feel a little bit cursed. We're looking at 6 years of these pre-dawn wake-ups. And, this is just kind of the beginning of his adolescence. I can only imagine what it's going to be like a few years from now. And also a few years from now when BLA is not new and exciting and different, and it's just the routine. It's going to get harder and harder. So to get to Boston Latin Academy from East Boston, he's getting up at about 5:40 in the morning. That's to get him out the door by 6 a.m. We're lucky if he eats breakfast. The first time that I tried to give him breakfast before he got out the door, he literally was, his body is not used to being awake, let alone eating, and he literally got sick on the way to school. He gets there, though, too late to be able to eat breakfast at school, so that means a lot of times, he's going until 11:30 before he's eating anything. Try as I might to get something in his body. So it's so counter to his physical and emotional development and where he's at right now to have him, pushed out the door at that hour. He's already missed a day of school this year because he was just so, just tired. It was a Thursday, and just the accumulated, having to try to get to bed early and not quite making it, and then getting up early. He just couldn't take it, and he had to miss school. There was another day when he arrived at Maverick Square. He discovered he had just missed the blue line, and the next train was coming in 10 minutes. Admittedly, he's a teenager. His powers of decision-making are not quite what maybe yours and mine are. But to then have him faced with, he's a little sleep-deprived, he's fighting his own internal clock, to have to deal with that situation and, what do I do? It overwhelmed him. And what did he do? He turned around and ran home and, came in the door crying. Luckily, I was there to kind of bail him out and give him a ride to school, but I can't do that every day. So it feels like just when we're asking our kids to take up more responsibility, we're saying you need to self-transport. That's, they're given a T-pass. When they're on transit, they're faced with a million decisions every day about, what do I do? Do I hop off the train here and get the Silver Line because it's going to be faster? Very dynamic, changing, variable situation. And so just when we're asking them to face that sort of situation, we're pushing them out the door when, they're half asleep. We heard from the experts that it's as if they're intoxicated. So having to make much more difficult decisions than they'd ever had to face before when, and then making it that much harder for them. It's also, my son plays sports. He's a soccer player, but he doesn't play sports at school. He plays sports with a travel team. And so there's so many resources available to our kids, whether it's sports or music or arts that are not school-based. There's fantastic opportunities at school, but there's also things that are available not at school. And his practices start at 6 p.m. He's done at 8 p.m. He's playing in Roxbury. So by the time we get home, it's 9 p.m. You know, so actually pushing the school start time later would make it easier for him to participate in sports or other activities that are out there and available. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on is the issue of equity. I live in East Boston. I've lived there for more than 13 years, just before my son was born when we moved there. Sorry to say this in front of Councilor LaMattina, but I've had to start thinking about, should I move? Should I move out of my neighborhood to make it easier for my son to be able to, you know, continue to have this incredible opportunity of Boston Latin Academy? But that is a choice that I have, and I know that not everybody has that choice. If I were living in public housing, you know, in neighborhoods like East Boston, where a majority of our residents are Latino or, you know, lower income residents, you don't always have those choices available. And so there's tremendous issues of equity here that I think the council really needs to take into consideration. So I thank you very much for taking this issue very seriously and urge you to pass a resolution to make the school start time later.
Thank you, Kim. And then Jeffrey, I don't have anyone else signed up for public testimony. Was there? You can come on down after Jeffrey. Come on down after, please. And just we're just past the 5:30 mark, so I'd love to not push you along, but
I'll be quick.
encourage you to be quick. Thank you.
So, my name is Jeff Klug. I live in Boston, obviously, and I have two children in the Boston Public Schools. One child at Boston Arts Academy that starts at 8 o'clock and goes to 4 o'clock. Another child, and there seems to be a number of us here, from Boston Latin Academy. We keep saying it starts at 7:20. In fact, it does. If you come in after 7:20, you're tardy. But homeroom starts at 7:10. The goal is to get there by 7:10, so you're in homeroom and roll is taken and you're counted as present. So I was certainly on the fence, and I will admit maybe even tending towards it's a bad idea to start school later. I went through graduate school getting 5 hours of sleep at night, and I was quite rigorous with myself, and I would say that the early bird catches the worm, and early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy and wealthy. Well, healthy, maybe not so wise. All those things I believed, and I believed helped get me through school and get me where I am. As I joined the committee to explore a later school start time, I was exposed to Dr. Seisner and Dr. Owen, so I wish we're still here. There are a couple of really salient things that happened in those presentations, and I wish that you could see Dr. Seisner's images as well as hear his words, because the image, the CAT scan of the brain, full of the detritus from metabolism and all of its capillaries and arteries, and watch it change in the last 2 hours of sleep and clean itself out, and have him tell you that that detritus contains a protein that not only inhibits brain development, but also is linked to Alzheimer's, is pretty damn compelling to see. And as a person who was on the fence and having to wrestle with the confrontation between the science and my own personal values, it took me a while to evolve. And I think that that personal journey is also a journey that will happen with many, many parents and the school system in general, and one that I hope begins soon. And I thank you both for having this hearing to further that discussion. Having reconciled those things, it's a bit like Saul when the things fall off your eyes and you become exactly the opposite of the person you started out as. When I walk into my daughter's bedroom at 6 o'clock in the morning and say, "Dear, after 7 hours of sleep, I want you to stop consolidating knowledge that you had yesterday and go to school. I want all of that detritus that still exists in your brain to stay there, because someday I want you to be able to go to a doctor and explain why you're having trouble with your memory." You feel pretty foolish dragging your kid out of bed when you used to think early bird catches the worm and you're going to be wise and healthy and wealthy, which is not the case. So in those last 2 hours of sleep, now we know what happens. And I embraced that science, which I had a hard time accepting. And I'm going to reiterate one statistic that Deb pointed to earlier. for the 10th graders at Boston Latin Academy, and I'm going to add them together, the less than 6 hours and the 6 to 7 hours, 80% of the 10th graders at Boston Latin Academy get less than 7 hours of sleep a night. And once you know what happens after 7 hours, it's unconscionable that we do this. Absolutely. I applaud both of you for being insightful enough to bring this into a public discussion, and I look forward to a robust and evolving discussion. And I pray that next year we start at 8:30. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you would just introduce yourself for the record.
Sure, Counselor. Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Mark Drayson. I reside at 95 Ardale Street in the Roslindale neighborhood of Boston. For purposes of identification, I'm the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, which is the regional planning agency for Greater Boston. And I also served as a member of the House of Representatives representing my community for a number of years ago. At the moment, I'm here as the parent of Sam, who is an 8th grader at Boston Latin Academy. We seem to have the numbers from BLA today. And I want to add my voice to those supporting a later start time. My son is up at 5:45 every morning. I'm up at 5:15 every morning, which may be the reason for my lack of articulateness today. And, you know, we work through the day. We've had many of the difficulties that other parents have mentioned. Difficulty getting him out of bed that early, accomplishing the things he needs to accomplish in the morning, making sure that lunch is made, making sure that he has some breakfast, and then getting him to bed at a very early hour in order to be able to accommodate the early rise. It is difficult because it is not the inclination that teenagers have. And we can accomplish some of that by dealing with the fact that he's tired, or by dealing with the tremendous authority that parents of teenagers usually have to exercise. But we can only accomplish so much. And I know that my son is generally dealing with about 7 hours of sleep, maybe 8 hours of sleep on a good night. And it's simply not enough. I tend to look at this not only, and I don't want to repeat the science, I don't want to repeat the survey data that Deb and other parents already have explained, which I think very nicely addresses some of the complaints and concerns that have been raised. But I'd like to deal with some of the political issues that I feel we're facing. And one of those is this notion that everybody needs to be completely informed and educated before we can make a change. We should have outreach. We should have education. We should have discussion. But for heaven's sakes, we shouldn't have 4 or 5 or 6 years of it. I mean, right now, you know, we've been parents of 2 public school children. Our kids have gone different start times all the time. I dealt with the 7:20 and the 8:30 and the 9:30, and they all have their pluses and they all have their minuses. Never did anyone come to us and say, we need to educate you and discuss this with you and see if you can possibly handle the issue of 2 different children going to school at 7:20 and 9:30 at the same time. It just happened. There was no deep concern expressed about that. And so I feel that there should be some analysis, there should be some education, of course, but for the most part, we already know the most important information, which is that our kids, on the whole, by and large, will do better if we start school later. We also know that there will be some benefits and some difficulties at the end of the day when you change the time. But for the most part, over time, those extracurricular activities and jobs and various other things will learn to accommodate themselves to the change in time. It may take a little while. Some people may be inconvenienced. But again, public policy is adopted not because of the occasional difficulty, but in response to the question, what will the overall benefits be? And here it seems to me, quite in distinction to many other public policies that you folks have to consider, there is already overwhelming evidence of the benefit. So I am pleased also today to hear from the school department folks, one of whom I think is still here with us today. But I was a little disappointed that there was no presentation already indicating with some specificity how this might be pursued, how the difficulties would be overcome, what the costs would be. There was no indication that there's a serious review going on that actually has a clock associated with it, never mind our kids' start times. And I'm hopeful that with the leadership of the council, certain members of the school committee, maybe the mayor, perhaps these issues could be attached to a timeline so that we could actually start piloting change really, really soon. And then if that works out and helps us figure out what the kinks are, maybe move to a system-wide 8:30 or later start. I think that would be for the benefit of our kids. And that, after all, is, I think, what we're all working on and what we're all most deeply concerned about. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And last but not least, if you would also just introduce yourself for the record.
My name is James Lesnick. I have a son in school. Over a year ago, a number of us that were supported initially went down and spoke with Boston Public Schools. And having heard a few people talk about the logistics involved with routing buses, I came away kind of dismayed, and I thought that the city could not survive a change such as this. I understand this is not, but the movement needs to start here. So I came away on a practical basis, and then I talked with other people, and I could see all of the reasons that they voiced of why to oppose it. Most of them because of convenience and work schedules. But then my background in science, then I got a hold of the summaries that were being circulated, and I sat down and read the research, and that changed everything, because this is not some school they just studied. This is the CDC. These are American medical associations. This is very serious and professional research. And I realized that the way to refute medical research, which is at the heart of our healthcare system, is to refute it with other medical research. So I searched on that, but could not find it. And it would be hard pressed to find any opposing research, but deny findings that were presented here tonight. And then I carried it further, and I realized that regardless of the convenience, regardless of sports and in our work life, that we need, this is the fundamental change for society, that it begins with the children. It begins with the healthy attitude, not just the healthy, but the best that we know how to do. And we structure our society backwards, perhaps, to accommodate what we know is best for the children. That's a lot of work to do. That's easy to say, and I know it's a tremendous amount of work for everyone. However, I feel that's what's in the right direction. Lastly, I just wanted to say, when my son was in 6th grade, I'll never forget, I came to school one day, and without saying a word, the teacher, who is now retired, who was quite experienced, looked down at my son and said, "Oh, he got lots of sleep last night." And to recognize the look on a student's face without any word said is quite phenomenal. But it took an experienced teacher to just recognize, oh, look, I can tell the difference. Without even talking to the child, I can see that he got, and she was right. So all I'm saying is that we need to refine our whole attitude, and of course, look forward to the work involved to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Counselor O'Malley or Counselor Lamatina, closing remarks?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, it was a pleasure to partner with you on this. I echo virtually everything that's been said from the parents and reiterate my hope that we can adjourn this into a working session and really address the anticipated challenges, but come up with a plan that can take those into account and get to May 30 start time, ideally in the next. So, look forward to continuing to partner with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Lamatina.
Thank you, both of you, for bringing up this issue. I think that after hearing the parents today and the professionals, this is a very, very important issue. And I think that we need to make sure that we change the start times. Maybe not for just the high school, maybe all the schools. I don't know how we do it, but we really need to really look at it. So I look forward, if you're going to have a working session or a resolution, I look forward to working with you to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to take a brief moment to thank everyone that presented here today, and then, of course, that testified at the end, and realize that we are all on the same page and that we're looking for outcomes that are best for the child and the child's academic performance, and making sure that we keep sort of our focus on that need and on that outcome as a goal. And I do look forward to rolling up my sleeves with my colleagues, with Councilor O'Malley as a co-sponsor of this, and with others, including Councilor Jackson and Councilor Lamatina, to work with Boston Public Schools to really find ways that we can come to some answers and come to some solutions and some changes to the way that we're doing things. I know for myself, as we've embarked upon this, one of the biggest challenges, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning, is that we don't do it because we haven't ever done it. We haven't made that change, and that's not a good enough reason to not make changes to how we do things in our schools. And my own experience at East Boston High, when we started to look at changing what we were doing in our first period classrooms as a school, really sent, I think, the wrong message to kids. It did tell our children that we wanted them to be successful and we wanted their marks to prove that. But what we told them is we only really cared about what was happening in math and English, as when we were putting other subject matters into that first period class and really calling them less important. But it was our way of sort of adjusting what we were doing to suit the child. But I look forward to a working session with the school department. I think that, obviously they are a critical player in all of this and will give us, I think, that valuable information, that valuable leadership as we move to a working session. So I thank you. More to come, and I appreciate your attention this evening.